shadow self is actually is a deep part of your psyche, of yourself, that you either suppress through psychological reasons, trauma reasons, or sociological reasons. We live in a society that is really homophobic, right? So you suppress your inner sexuality in order to fit within that dynamic of your social wherever you're at, right? Inevitably that part will come out. Or let's say that you are dealing with, for another example, right? You're sitting in your life and you notice that you have an anger problem or things like this. These are just parts of your inner shadow self, right? This is just a brief, and I'm going to get into it more. Well, who brought up the shadow self? Well, his name is Carl Jung. Carl Jung was born in 1875 and died in 1961. And he was a Swiss psychoanalyst slash mystic, kind of brainiac, who started out from Sigmund Freud. Now, Sigmund Freud was also a very prominent psychologist. Some of you might have heard of the Freudian slip, right? The Freudian slip is actually something that goes into this very deeply. But Freudian slip is essentially when something comes out of you that you unintentionally did that was inside, right? So you could call that kind of in a way your shadow self, right? But he was basically learned a lot from Sigmund Freud, right? Kind of broke away once Sigmund Freud became too obsessed with sex and not enough with souls and things like that, right? So he invented the analytical psychology. So he introduced concepts like archetypes, collective unconscious, synchrony, introvert versus extrovert, and of course, the shadow self, right? He was part psychologist, part philosopher, part alchemist, and low-key an occultist with a lab coat. We're going to start with this diagram here. So as you can see in this diagram, there's says the personal, your persona, the ego, the self, the shadow self, all this, right? So I'm going to go through and explain each one, right? So the self is you. It's your core you, who you are, your true whole. Most never really fully reach it because of their ego, right? But integrating it means unifying your consciousness and your unconscious, right? What needs to happen is that you need to get into a situation where you have dealt with your ego. Now, your ego isn't bad, right? In a nutshell, innately. But once you get a grasp of everything, then you can get into your true self, right? Next will be your ego, right? Your ego is your conscious identity. Ego, right? It's your conscious identity. It's who you think you are. It's the I that navigates your daily life, exists between your outer experiences and your inner depth. Now, your ego is in fact what keeps you away from a lot of certain things. So your ego develops after your ID, right? Your ego, then your super ego, correct? Right? Your ID is what you're born with. Your ego starts to develop in later part of your brain development, and then of course your super ego, which is where a lot of your morals and things based off of later on, right? Well, the ego within itself can also carries all these things that keep you from tapping into your shadow self. Whether it's I'm too prideful to admit when I'm wrong, man, that could be because you were told you were wrong all the time, or you have some inner personality disorder that's keeping you from admitting you're wrong, right? Or the ego could be like, well, it could even be something good in certain aspects. Like, I don't want to ask for money, even though I really need money right now, and it could really help me in the long run. You know what I'm saying? So that's some of the reasons why the ego can interfere with tapping into your real self. After your ego, what you see on the diagram, you see that it's your persona, right? So your persona, you probably know this word, right? So your persona is like the mask that you wear in front of the world, right? A lot of people, like, in simplest terms, it's like a lot of men will say, oh, I'm a tough guy, right? When really they're inside, they're just a teddy bear, right? Your persona is essentially what you've experienced and what you're trying to put out into the world in order to get that self gratification that you may or may not already feel like you have, right? This part is one of the hardest things to calcimate, because breaking that false self within yourself is extremely difficult. It takes a lot of shadow work in order to do that, right? And next, obviously, we have your shadow, right? So your shadow self is the things that you suppress the most. It is your repressed emotions, your repressed traumas, your suppressed traits you forced out, maybe due to society or something like that, right? Or a lot of times your family or whatever. So your shadow self can sometimes will inevitably come out. Conscious mind, right, is things that you consciously do, right? It's in the word, right? So it's like I have this I don't know, this incense burner or whatever, right? I know I need to light it for this ritual I'm about to do, right? That was my conscious mind. Now your unconscious mind typically speaks through symbols, right? So your unconscious mind or your soul, depending on how you look at it, your own studies, will not speak to you. So when your unconscious mind will typically speak to you in dreams. It'll speak to you through things um, like my last video. Check it out if you ain't seen it, with new numbers and numerology and things like that. You're seeing the same numbers over and over again, or something like this. Your unconscious mind will communicate to you in that aspect, right? In order to create a medium, now the goal is to create a medium between your conscious mind and your unconscious mind, right? Once you create that bridge between the two, you'll be able to achieve things, better intuition, better ways of connecting to your soul in itself, connecting to the divine. And if you're doing a lot of if you decide to start doing a lot of ritual work and things like that, it's really important that you have addressed your shadow self. If you're going to be working with we'll say spirits, right, you're going to end up getting humbled a lot, because a lot of them will not work with you if you have not worked on your shadow self. It will make somebody cheat on their partner, right? Well, a lot of the time, some people weren't ready. They weren't ready to get into a relationship or whatever, and they had a lot more sexual desires. But why did they have these sexual desires? I don't know. That was within their shadow self that they didn't address before they got into a relationship. But they got into something committed, was to fill a void rather than just addressing the real reason why they were feeling empty. Simple concepts, right? These are just the best way to baseline. I want to also explain that everybody has a feminine side and a masculine side. So you also saw in the diagram the anima and the animus, right? So your animus is your more masculine side, right? And then your anima is your more feminine aspect, right? You need now, do I literally mean feminine, masculine? Not necessarily. They're more so archetypes, right? So it's like what an archetype is essentially what what people or you think of something, right? So you imagine masculine with muscles, or like, fighting or anger or whatever, right? Or you associate femininity with motherly or whatever. So these are bridges to the unconscious and the archetypes of the opposite energy within you. And once you integrate these, you'll get access to your intuition and creativity and a lot of your divine inner purpose and things like that, right? It's running your life. I mean, you'll project it onto other people, you know, and you'll say, oh, they're selfish. Maybe you are afraid of your own self projection, excuse me, right? You stay stuck and anxious and bitter and unfortunately spiritually disconnected and things like that. Now, if you integrate your shadow in your day-to-day life and you integrate it into your meditation and what you actually think about, now you could do these things through therapy, and you could do these things through ritual work and meditation, right? Whatever really truly works with you. But unfortunately, most people never actually be able to break their ego. The ego within itself is one of the hardest things to work through. For example, like in Hermeticism or in alchemy, right? You're talking about the philosopher's stone, right? And the divine to self. It's not literal. It's not a literal stone. It's, it represents your spiritual enlightenment, mastery and things like that, and your real spiritual sovereignty, right? Now this goes into the shadow self. Now shadow alchemy, whatever. This is why Carl Jung was considered an alchemist. He was doing things just like this, you know. Calcination is the first thing, you know, he's trying to burn the ego. Dissolution is breaking the false self, so that persona, right? Separation means finding the truth. Separation is forgetting what contradicts, paying attention to what's consistent, and ignoring what contradicts, right? Then you have conjunction, you know, you unite opposites, you know. Conjunction is, like I said in my numerology videos, oftentimes with the number 2. You need to create a medium between the two and unite the opposites. You know, your feminine, your masculine side, your side that's angry with your happy side. Create a medium. Fermentation, right? Your fermentation is your spiritual rebirth. You know, once you get to a place in life where you've done all the important things, you'll start to achieve gnosis and achieve things like within your, and have a really good inner voice after that. Then you have coagulation, which is the last step to embody your divine truth. We are unable to address our ego, and our shadow self will inevitably burst out. This is why a lot of people end up becoming very scattered in life, why a lot of people end up not being able to move on. Your insecurities, a lot of people will end up not moving in general because they're so stuck on perfection, because something happened, some trauma thing that made them be that way, right? So we're gonna stop there. I just want to kind of explain the concept of the shadow self and the unconscious mind. If you enjoyed the video, like and subscribe. I'll holler at y'all later.